Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Super Series Tuesday. My name is Latisha Grant. I am the National Chair of House Then the Car, and I'd like to welcome you to Super Series Tuesday, where today, episode 2, we will discuss home ownership from a sociological perspective. I am excited about our topic, but I am even more excited about our special guest. And our special guest is Ms. Asheli S. Atkins, MBA, who is a business consultant and a Sociology PhD candidate at Texas A&M University. Her research interests are racial and ethnic relations, organizational theory, African American entrepreneurship, sociology of entrepreneurship, and economic sociology. In addition, Asheli serves as a sociology instructor at Prairie View A&M University, where she teaches social problems, general sociology, and social theory. Realtors, let's welcome Miss Asheli Atkins. Thank you so much, Asheli, for joining us today. And I guess we'll walk right into it and get to know a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about you, Asheli.
So you hit a couple of you hit pretty much everything on the head. I'm a business consultant. I have a consulting firm called Atkins Consulting, and I am a current PhD candidate at Texas A&M, hoping to graduate in August. So let's pray on that. And I am a sociology instructor at Prairie View A&M University, and I'm just happy to be here. I am a lot are part of this amazing organization, so I'm happy to offer my take with my education and my background on this really important topic of home ownership.
Yes, and I really thank you for that. We often just explore home ownership and how to get an individual from the thought of home ownership to owning a home, but there are a few components that we've missed, and understanding it from a sociological perspective is probably one of those key factors that's going to bridge that gap between getting a person interested to getting them closed. So you tell us, why is this conversation important?
So there's one thing that I think that a lot of people don't realize is because oftentimes literature happens in an academic space and it kind of like stays there. So you have a lot of scholars and academics who are writing these amazing articles in these amazing journals, and they're doing all this research, but it never goes anywhere outside of academia. It never gets to the people that really, need it. But with conversations like this, I'm able to not only share my research, but also the research that has laid the foundation for my research. And so when we think about these experiences of home buyers, we hear all these stories about, discrimination and racism and all of these things. But one thing that I don't think that people realize is that when home ownership equals access. So it's not just, access to a home, but it's access to good schools, it's access to safer neighborhoods, it's access to, in some cases, food, access, grocery stores, all of these things that kind of like trickle down. Food equates to health. And so where somebody lives is really, really important for beyond just their home, but their whole entire life. And so when we think about home ownership from an economics perspective, people assume that the real estate industry is, race neutral, like race and gender neutral, like race doesn't matter, gender doesn't matter, you're just buying a home, none of those things are important, right? It doesn't matter what gender you are, it doesn't matter what race you are. And so like this race and gender neutral assumption or belief is false, because we hear these stories from people who have faced discrimination, who have higher interest rates, than other groups. But when we take this information and we look at it from other disciplines, specifically sociology, we're able to identify, the discrimination and racism that occurs from real estate agents. We're able to talk about living discrimination. We're able to talk about, racial steering that occurs in the real estate industry. But fortunately, what's really important to me is not only talking about the barriers, because we are aware, whether we're aware of them on an individual level, like our own personal stories, or an academic level. What's important to me is moving beyond the barriers to the strategies that that home buyers can use to become homeowners. So what are some of the strategies that they can call on, they can pull out when they are faced with, living discrimination, or when they have a fear of going and looking at a house in a predominantly, white neighborhood and they won't get treated the same? What are some things they can do to, navigate and avoid a lot of these barriers that oftentimes prevent people from even starting the home ownership process?
Right. And that's really deep and heavy, because we live in a world that we like to believe that, discrimination doesn't occur anymore. But there are so many different layers and levels to discrimination. So why is it, based upon your research, why is it that you believe that it still occurs in today's society?
Mm-hmm. And I think it's because there is often an assumption that's made with by people with privilege. So you have this group of people with privilege, whether it's white privilege, whether it's gender male privilege, whether it's class privilege. And so it's really important to realize that just because you are a minority, or just because you are Black or African American, doesn't mean you don't have privilege, because you could be a man, you could be somebody of middle or upper class, and your experience in the home buying process is not going to be the same. And so you oftentimes hear people with class, gender, and race privilege saying that, race and class and gender don't matter because I've never dealt with discrimination. Yeah, because you are a middle upper class person. I've never dealt with, discrimination on my gender. Yeah, because you're a man. And so what we have to do is make sure that we draw attention to the people that don't get equal opportunity, don't get equal access when it comes to this home buying process. The people that go to the bank and they, get a higher interest rate than somebody else who's of a different race than them. And then making sure that they realize it's not just them. It's not just you, this one person that's getting this higher interest rate. There's data and research out there that covers hundreds and thousands of people who are minority, who receive higher interest rate when all things are equal. When we look at everybody's creditworthiness, education, income, all things equal, people who are minority are still receiving higher interest rates than other people. And so what we have to do is we have to move away from that assumption that that this process of home ownership is gender and race neutral, because it's just simply not.
Right.
And so to point out again, scholars talk about the home buying discrimination when it comes to lending discrimination. So what we see is that 82% of home buyers are declined mortgage loans, even despite creditworthy. Means again, even though you have the credit to get the mortgage loan, you don't receive it, you're denied. And then the ones that do receive the mortgage loan, that are accepted, that successfully are accepted, they receive 0.5% higher interest rate than other people. And so when we really just zoom in, we notice that the discrimination is not only based on race, but it's also based on education. It's also based on gender. And so there is a scholar that recently found out that Black applicants who have no college education are either denied at a higher rate when it comes to mortgage loans, or they receive a higher interest rate. And so what this means is that you're leaving people out of the home buying process simply because they don't have an education.
Right.
Not because they don't have the money, not because they don't have, whatever you need to, to own a home, not because they don't have what is required, simply because they don't have a college education. And when we call it what it is, that's just simply not fair. But then when we look at the data, on a larger scale, and what this means when you say people who don't have college education are declined or have higher interest rate, it leads to financial issues. It makes them very vulnerable to financial instability in the long run. And then also, again, it talks about access to schools for their children, access to quality food, access to safe environments. And then when we zoom in even further, we look at Black women. Black women are the most vulnerable out of all the groups when it comes to race, age, and gender, because again, you're a double minority. Not only are you Black, but then you're also a woman. And we top that off with younger women who are trying to begin this home buying process. They're also experience discrimination, and they become again more vulnerable to this process. And we think about just knowing this information, it will make you just fearful to even begin the process. So you may want to buy a home, but then when you're knowledgeable about this, you're just like, well, maybe I shouldn't. If they're going to discriminate against me because I'm Black, let me not go get the bank loan.
Right.
They're going to treat me like I'm not knowledgeable when I go and talk to the real estate agent. Maybe let me just not even do this whole process. And so you don't even begin because you're afraid. Just simply put, you're just afraid because you know that there's so many hurdles and barriers to jump over, and it's just an home buying process is already a long process, and it becomes more exhausting when there's just unnecessary barriers that are put into place just because of how you identify.
So in speaking of that, the layers, and I'd like to kind of tell you a little bit about a situation that I was involved with. I had a client, and we even think about source of income because she was employed. However, she had a secondary source of income, which just so happened to be from the Housing Choice Voucher Program. Because she had a portion of her mortgage payment was going to come from, or it was an additional income source because they had to use it as income, was going to come from a third party, which in this case was Housing Choice Voucher. There was an additional layer added to her approval.
Wow.
And talk about how discouraging that was, because now we're saying, well, you're getting this portion of payment, which of course is from the government. We're going to receive it. It's not, I mean, we can talk about contingencies all day long. You know, you're not guaranteed to have a job tomorrow. So they tried to blame it on that. But when they told her she had to bring $1,000 of her own funds to closing, when that wasn't a layer that was added to any other loan.
Wow. And so what do you do in those situations? Like, how do you advise, you know, what type of advice do you give to your clients when they have to deal with this? And it's, you know, as an experienced realtor, that this is not the norm.
Well, in this particular case, this was just one bank. So we switched to another bank, and then we turned around and we reported that information to an attorney. And I actually, not with this particular bank, but I had another situation where I had two clients. They actually sued a bank and they both were awarded $50,000 because it was true discrimination. Yeah. You know, you have to, some of these things you have to take a step further because you see it and you know that this is not a layer that's associated with that particular program. And then even when you talk about education, when you say, okay, well, you're declined at a higher rate because you've not received a college education, that's like a double-edged sword. You know, the college education typically comes with a student loan. If you obtain the student loan, you don't qualify for the loan. You apply for the loan, you're declined because you've not gotten an education. You know, you're just hit from both sides.
Exactly. And so that's what I mean when I say, like, the process is, it can become exhausting. It can become exhausting to the point where you just give up and you just say, you know, okay, I'll just rent. You know, I'll just keep renting, you know, these apartments. I'll just keep renting a home from someone else, because you know, and you've experienced what it takes, or you've heard stories, like, you know, yourself, you've heard stories of people who have gone through these exhausting processes. And you just, it deters you from a really important process of home ownership.
Yeah. Now, in your research, one of the things that you sent to me was coded language.
Yes.
And I definitely like to talk to our realtist audience about coded language. And I'll share with you this. So African Americans, of course, as you know, and not always had the opportunity to be a part of realtors, hence where realtist comes from. So right, but in with that, in knowing, I mean, so of course we're not second nature to discrimination. We know it, we've seen it, we've lived it, unfortunately. And now here we are with NAREB, and our realtist nation. So shout out to our realtist nation. Thank you guys for giving us this platform to discuss home ownership from a sociological platform, because this is extremely important. So let's talk about it. What in the world is coded language?
And so, okay, so coded language, it kind of touches on a couple points. So this comes from a study. I'm trying to pull it up here. But to begin with, when we think about just the current climate of racism and discrimination in the US, right? So we may not see, and this comes from a scholar named Bonilla Silva, we may not see really overt discrimination or just, you know, over racism where somebody's just calling you, you know, a racial slur, or somebody is, you know, doing more like overt direct things. But now it's a little bit more subtle, right? So in Bonilla Silva's work, he says it's colorblind racism, where it becomes a little bit harder to pin, like it feels racist. I really can't pinpoint why it feels racist, but this kind of feels racist, right? And so along those same lines, Crover Glenn is a sociologist, and she actually did some work with Rice University. With Rice University. And so she finds out that she studied a bunch of realtors in Houston, 3 areas in Houston. So we think about Fifth Ward, the Heights, and then North Side. And just a vast number of realtors, and she's examining them and following them. And she's performing not only quantitative research, but also qualitative. And qualitative is where we capture, really in-depth conversation from participants. And she finds that they're using language that is legal, but it's unethical, right? So I can't sue because you didn't say that this neighborhood is a Black neighborhood and it's poor and it's broke down and it's X, Y, and Z and all these, stereotypes and stigmas that we often associate with Black neighborhoods. But you'll find a way to kind of like, just slowly and kind of slickly and like really, just kind of like subtly say what you're trying to say without saying it. So she
less
gives an
desirable is something I've heard.
Exactly. Yes. Right. So less desirable. And so she gives an example of somebody, asking if the neighborhood is Black. And so she says, "Oh, people always ask me if this neighborhood is Black. Is this neighborhood Black?" So she kind of like really lets the client know that not only are they asking, but many people have asked if this neighborhood is Black. Right. So if I tell you that a lot of people are asking if this neighborhood is Black, it's probably a Black neighborhood, right? And then she goes on to say, well, I tell them, okay, I can't tell you if this neighborhood is Black or not, but just look around, just look around at, the quote that she gives is, the tires and then the tamales, all under one roof. And so she's saying like, so it's a way to like use certain, like racialize certain things that really shouldn't be racialized, like food and objects, in order to connect it to a specific race. And so she goes on to give examples like this throughout her article of realtors just simply saying, just like using really coded language. And the reason why they say they do it, racially coded language, a client. So if I'm white and I know my client's white and I know my client doesn't want to live in a Black neighborhood, I can use racial codes or coded language to let them know that this is a Black neighborhood. Oh, well, it's not as at night. There is a lot of violence, or I've heard that there's a lot of violence in this neighborhood. It's a really diverse neighborhood. They're looking for a neighborhood that is specifically more white, calling a neighborhood more a really diverse neighborhood,
absolutely,
multicultural neighborhood, right? And again, it's just simply to build trust. It's just to build trust with the client and saying, we're like each other. We're alike. I want to make sure that you get the best house in the best neighborhood, and the best neighborhood isn't a Black neighborhood. And I want to let you know that I'm on board with you. But what's sad is that she finds that I think somewhere between 81% of agents use coded language. That was what she found in her study. But what's also sad is that it's not just white agents, right?
That's right.
So it's also Black agents, it's agents who are doing the same thing in order to build trust with their clients. If I'm a Black agent and I have a Black client who doesn't want to live in a neighborhood with Latinx people, I can use coded language again, like, oh, well, this is a Spanish-speaking neighborhood. They speak a lot of Spanish in this neighborhood. I can just, really call on a lot of the stereotypes and stigmas that are out there to subtly let you know what I'm trying to let you know in a legal way, even though it's really unethical.
Right. Dang, and you said 82% or 81%? That's an extremely high number.
Yeah, so 81% of white agents use coded language. It's a very, very high number. And this is in Houston. So this is the Heights, this is North Side, this is Fifth Ward. Houston, 81% of white agents are using, in her study, the ones that she observed, are using this language. But it was over 40% of non-white agents were using it as well. So 41% of non-white includes Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, all these other groups. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting because you said to build trust. So I've had clients that have relocated to Houston, and typically it's my African American clients that are relocating, and they'll ask me a couple things like, how far am I from a barbershop and barbecue? I want to be by my people, and it takes me aback because it's like, how do you actually answer that question? Because you kind of know, I mean, it's easy and it's easy to go one way or the other. And if you put yourself in the wrong, in a bad position, it's going to be hard for you to dig your way out of that one. So you have to be very, very careful how you answer it. But what I like to tell my agent is, you always provide a client with facts. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily have to answer that question. So we were provided, if we have joined the Realtors board, there was a program, it's a REI source, and what it allowed us to do is take a search area and tell the client everything that's in that area.
Good.
So now it removed me from having to answer that question, but it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's almost like, we're being backed into a corner, and
Mm-hmm.
what do you do? Because you do want that client, but I'm still surprised to hear that 81%, because that's an extremely high number.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's so many things to do to avoid it, but I'm glad that you are finding ways to still be, still address their concern. If they want to know how close they are to a barbershop and barbecue, here is a resource. Here's a guide of local, local businesses in the area, and it's a way to stay ethical without, really playing on their, playing on whatever type of ploy they're trying to, put out there. There's ways to avoid it and be ethical.
Yeah, yeah. So we've talked about quite a few things that some I'm going to call it awareness, and I'm not going to call it discouraging, because at the end of the day, we live in this world, and what we have to do as a group is we just have to learn how to maneuver our way through it and find a way to achieve those things that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So what advice do you have to give to our audience to assist in avoiding these barriers, these traps, what advice do you have for them?
So exactly to your point, spot on. Like, we don't want to discourage people from the home buying process with this information, because again, it can be discouraging to know that all this is occurring. But what we need them to do, and what I do in my current research when I'm studying entrepreneurs, is I talk about strategy construction processes. So what can you do? What strategies can you do to avoid barriers, right? And a lot of the data in my study also transfers to the home buying process. So what entrepreneurs can do, also people who are in the home buying process can also do, they can, kind of employ these same strategies. So one strategy is social networks. So NAREB is a great, a lot of people don't know that this resource exists, and that there are realtors that you can rely on and talk to for advice even before you begin the home buying process. Even as simply as following them on social media, right? You guys have a social media Instagram page, I think a Facebook page as well. Simply following these organizations allows you information, right? It allows you access to information before you even begin the process. And so that information can assist you in the process, right? So tapping into social networks that you really have. I think there's this assumption that you have to be a realtor, a realist, in order to be a part of NAREB, right?
Right.
But
right.
you can still be involved in this group and get information, even though you're not in the real estate industry, right?
Absolutely.
And so we have to move away from the assumption that you have to be a part of the industry to be a part of these organizations, right? So social networks is key, right? Also, on top of that is getting into, so that ties into the idea that sometimes people get information from social networks that they're already a part of, right? Your church, your college, your friend group, your fraternity, your sorority, right? It's really important to step outside into organizations that you may not know anybody. You may get into a NAREB and not know anyone. But the thing here with that, it's called a weak tie. So it's a weak tie to a social network. Those are really beneficial because it provides you new and insightful information that you would otherwise never have received if you had to just stay connected to your previous social networks, your church and your sorority and fraternity. Right. Also, what I found with a lot of entrepreneurs when they're applying for business loans is that they don't go into the bank. We're operating right now in a very virtual world. Yeah. They're actually applying for loans online. And the thing with this, how this assists them, and it's kind of like a sad but really important strategy to be aware of, is that they wouldn't racially identify, they wouldn't check their gender or their sex or their race on these forms. They would opt out of identifying. And so what that does is that when you send, what we found with the business loans, that they would send the information back to the bank, and the bank would assume their race and their gender based on their income and their education and where they currently live. And so what that did is that for a lot of people, because they have credit worthiness, they're making a nice income, the banks would assume that they were white, even though that they were Black. And so they would again have, of course, have to send in a picture of their ID or a copy of their ID after the fact. But they've already been, have been accepted or been in the process.
Right, right. So they've made an assumption
and so,
of your ethnicity prior to even getting a copy of your application. Check the box. And once that for us on our side, the application is a 1003. So once that 1003 is submitted, no one is double working themselves, recalling it to check the right box.
Yeah. And so again, like I mentioned, this is specific. I mean, I'm glad that this is definitely transferable to the homeownership process. But, there's participants mentioned that they would of course have to send in a copy of their ID after, but at this point the process has already begun. And so it's like I said, it's a really unfortunate strategy, but it's still a strategy. Applying online, opting out of identifying whether it's they ask you what your gender is or your race is or your sex, however they word it on the form, just opting out of that and letting your income and your creditworthiness lead the way. Also, as me, someone who is an advocate for Black-owned businesses, using Black-owned businesses, using, there's a lot of Black-owned real estate brokers and agents out there, using them. But then the issue is that, which is really unfortunate, but a lot of times, the respondents in my study, they didn't associate Black-owned with legitimate. Like, this isn't a legitimate real estate firm because it's Black-owned, and we have to really move away from that, because there's no correlation between race and legitimacy. Like, just because this is white-owned doesn't make it more legitimate of a business than a Black-owned business. And so really relying on Black-owned businesses, because you can avoid, maybe not avoid, but it lessens a lot of the barriers of not being shown as many, homes by a white realtor because you're Black and they don't want to show you, X, Y, and Z homes. Also, if you're a woman choosing, if you identify as a woman, choosing someone who is, or maybe a woman-owned, Black-owned real estate agent or real estate firm, as someone who identifies as the barriers that women go through when they are, going in this home buying process as well. And then calling out when you see the coded language, when you see, if your realtor is trying to use the coded language and trying to subtly tell you about certain areas, calling it out, to your point, really taking the steps to, whether it's suing the bank, whether it's filing a complaint, taking the steps to address the discrimination that you're facing, because again, it's not just you that's experiencing it. If you call it out, hopefully the next person that comes in, the next young Black person that comes in to that bank or to that real estate firm won't have to deal with it, because you've taken the steps to legally address that action.
There is so much that, until this conversation with you, that I was unaware of. We see it, but to know that there's data that supports it, it's important. And I think that this conversation is so valuable to us as realtors, to us as consumers, to us as entrepreneurs. And I think that we need to have more of these engaging conversations on social media platforms, face-to-face platforms, all of that, just so that we are, at bare minimum, that we are aware.
Absolutely.
And then we would then know how to move thereafter. And I get it. I have heard all the time, people are taking extra precautions when they find out that the business is African American owned, and it becomes, well, let me make sure. And I didn't necessarily grow up that way. For me, it's when we were younger, everything was at a brick and mortar. There was no working from home. I mean, I'm an exennial, so every true business had a brick and mortar. So if you walked in and there was no furniture in the brick and mortar, then that's when you're like, wait, maybe, maybe they're going to up and move. Not necessarily basing that just on race, because it's an African American owned business, therefore it's not legitimate. I mean, we work extremely hard to keep the doors open for our consumers. So, Asheli, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience before we call this an end?
So I just kind of really want to reiterate this. None of this is to steer people away from the home buying process, again, because it's like, you see your point, it's just awareness. You need to be aware of what's going on out there, so you're not walking out there, blindsided by what data already shows is occurring out there. So just awareness. And so that the first point is just make sure you're informed. As somebody who if you're someone who's going into the home buying process, make sure that you are informed. And so what this does is that real estate agents, you don't have to rely on coded language or trying to connect in an unethical way to your client. Be a resource for them. To me, if I want to trust a business or trust a real estate agent, I'm going to trust the one that provides information to me long before I begin the buying process,
Right.
because they are a trusted resource. Like, resources and information is key, and if you're the one that's providing me with the most information, you're the one that I trust. Not because you're sitting up here like, yeah, there is a barbecue shop and there is a liquor store right around the corner. Not because you're doing that and trying to connect with me. That doesn't build trust to me. What builds trust is the person that is a flow of information, the go-to source. Yeah. And then also to the people that are in the home buying process, just make sure that you do your work. Make sure that you understand what interest rates should be. Make sure you understand, what all the boxes that you need to check in order to a mortgage loan, so that you know if you're being taken advantage of. So you know that this is where interest rates fall for the home buying process. If you're receiving something that's a red flag, it's a red flag, right? And you only know that it's a red flag because you've done your information, you've done your research to know what your interest rates should be, what percentage of people are accepted when it comes to a mortgage loan. You're aware, but if you don't do your research, you can't be aware, and you can't always expect your real estate agent to do all the research for you. You have to come to the table with some information.
Right. Well, guys, you heard it first here, home ownership from a sociological perspective. Asheli, will you please provide the audience with your company's information?
So again, it's Addicts England Consulting. But if you're just looking for a way to contact me, my website is www.ashley.atkins.com. So it's ASHELI Atkins.com. That's just the easiest way to get in contact with me for whether it's your consulting needs or whether you want to know more about my research, or if you want to be a participant in my research. I'm currently doing a study with freelancers, and so I'm doing some collecting data on people who are involved in the gig economy, which is a very important industry right now. So you can find everything you need at www.ashley.atkins.com.
Perfect. Thank you again, Asheli. Realtist in the audience, my name is Latisha Grant. I am the National House Then the Car Chair for National Association of Real Estate Brokers. And we definitely thank you again for joining us for episode 2 of Super Series Tuesday. Thank you, and you have a wonderful day. Don't forget to join us on Wednesday for Homeownership Changed My Life. Have a good one.